Chapter 1. Kent, England, April 1812. Fitzwilliam Darcy shifted in the barouche adorned with his family's crest, his thoughts in turmoil. His cousin, Colonel Richard Fitzwilliam, had insisted on paying one last visit to the parsonage before departing Kent. The Colonel, ever the sociable and considerate gentleman, was keen to check on Miss Elizabeth Bennet's well-being, worried that their recent conversation might have played a part in her indisposition, which had led to her absence from Rosings the previous night. Darcy himself was suffering a mixture of reluctance and anticipation, uncertain of how to face the young woman again after their last encounter. "She seemed well enough when last I saw her, though somewhat disconcerted," he said, glancing at Darcy. Darcy made no response, prompting the other man to continue. "Do you not wish to know why I suspect she was upset?" "You wish to tell me," Darcy responded, his gaze fixed out the carriage window, "and given our present circumstances, I am obliged to listen." This was encouragement enough. "I fear I mentioned the circumstances from last autumn in Hertfordshire, the incident involving your successful intervention to rescue a friend from an imprudent match." Darcy's jaw tightened. "I wish you had not." "Why ever not?" Fitzwilliam asked, taken aback by his cousin's reaction. "I spoke nothing but the truth. Yet, in hindsight, I cannot help but feel that Miss Elizabeth might have some connection with the family we were discussing. It leaves me wondering if I should have held my tongue." "Connection indeed. The young lady in question was her elder sister and the gentleman, Charles Bingley," Darcy explained. "Pray, how did it not dawn on you that the family was Miss Elizabeth's own?" Colonel Fitzwilliam's eyes widened in disbelief. "You cannot mean it. Miss Elizabeth Bennet's family? Why, there is nothing in her character indicative of the impropriety you described. Indeed, your behaviour toward her these past weeks has hinted strongly at admiration, if not more. One might even suggest that our delay in leaving Kent stems from your reluctance to part from her company." "Pray do not remind me," Darcy muttered, a bitter edge to his voice. "All the more reason we ought to pay a proper farewell call," the Colonel insisted. "You owe her an explanation, if only to dispel any misunderstanding my indiscretion might have caused." As their carriage approached the parsonage, Darcy finally yielded to his cousin's persistent urging. A part of him supposed there could be little harm in seeing Elizabeth one last time. Perhaps, after reading his letter, a painstaking refutation of Wickham's deceitful tales and an honest account of his intentions concerning Bingley and her sister, she might lean toward forgiveness. Darcy gave an inaudible harumph, for he struggled to concede that he'd committed any real offence. "I acted reasonably. She is the one who behaved imprudently. How dare someone of her standing refuse me?" Half an hour later, Darcy found himself seated in the Collinses' parlour, his eyes shifting between the slowly ticking mantel clock and the doorway that remained empty. The fresh aroma of tea lingered in the air, but it did nothing to calm his busy mind. He then consulted his own watch. "Where is she?" The minutes seemed to stretch into eternity, each tick of the second hand amplifying his impatience. Surely she should have returned by now. Had Elizabeth reached the parsonage, seen his carriage, and chosen to prolong her walk rather than encounter him? Could he really blame her? His letter had been composed not to assuage her feelings, but to justify his own conduct. Its opening line could not help but intrude. "Be not alarmed, madam, at receiving this letter, nor apprehend any renewal of those sentiments or offers which were last night so disgusting to you." Colonel Fitzwilliam stood abruptly, cutting off whatever nonsense Lady Catherine de Bourgh's sycophantic vicar, Mr. William Collins, was in the middle of espousing, and likewise interrupting Darcy's musing. "I shall seek Miss Bennet myself," he announced. "She cannot be far." "A plain-looking, sensible woman," Mrs. Charlotte Collins said. "I am sure she will return soon, but if you think it best—" Darcy stood, cutting off any further debate. "Your eagerness to spare Miss Bennet's displeasure is commendable, Fitzwilliam, but we dare not delay our departure further. I risk missing an important appointment with my solicitor if we do not leave at once." Turning to Charlotte, he said, "Mrs. Collins," and nodded toward Mr. Collins, "please convey our sincerest wishes for Miss Bennet's pleasurable remaining stay, and her safe return to Hertfordshire." The look of frustration etched on Fitzwilliam's face was unmistakable. His brow furrowed and lips pressed tightly together, but Darcy remained unaffected by his cousin's silent protest. With a composed demeanour he preceded Fitzwilliam out the door and into the waiting carriage. Once again inside the confines of the carriage, Colonel Fitzwilliam eyed Darcy with a mix of curiosity and scepticism. "A meeting with your solicitor? Since when do you hide behind such flimsy excuses? It almost seemed like you were trying to avoid encountering Miss Elizabeth. Were you so afraid of her reception?" Darcy sighed, staring out of his window at the passing countryside. "I need not guess at her reception. I know how she feels as I spoke with her last evening. Like you, I was concerned by her absence at Rosings, and having a matter of immense importance to discuss with her, I left our party under the guise of urgent business affairs." Fitzwilliam frowned. "If memory serves, you claimed pressing business affairs required your immediate attention, and sequestered yourself in the study." "No," Darcy confessed. "I was instead with Miss Elizabeth." He brushed both hands over his face before resuming his speech. "To make a long story short, I offered her my hand in marriage." The Colonel drew in a sharp breath, stunned. "Good God, and she refused?" "Trust me, I was just as surprised as you are," Darcy said. "Well, you appear unharmed physically, so I presume her rejection was not violent, even if your confidence is a bit shaken. If words alone could physically pierce, I might easily have bled to death." "Surely it was not so dire as that," Fitzwilliam said. "It was worse," Darcy admitted. "Her refusal left no room for hope or reconciliation. She made her sentiments unmistakably clear." Colonel Fitzwilliam, ever the optimist, persisted. "I understand your pride is wounded, Darcy, but elegant young ladies often refuse initial proposals, preferring to keep respectable gentlemen in suspense. You ought not to dismiss a future with Miss Elizabeth altogether so easily as that." Darcy regarded his cousin in disbelief. She left no doubt as to her disdain, founded upon wilful misunderstandings and misplaced trust. "Then correct the misunderstandings," the Colonel urged. "Upon our arrival in town, inform Bingley of your error regarding Miss Bennet. Go with him to Hertfordshire, and properly court Miss Elizabeth. Surely, if your feelings prompted a proposal of marriage, you must love her. What is a little hardship compared to the reward of winning the woman with whom you meant to spend the rest of your life?" Darcy's eyes narrowed. "Rejecting my hand in marriage is surely the greatest mistake in her life. The least I can do is put myself directly in her path, allowing her to see what she's missing and reconsider her stance. I shall go to Hertfordshire. I will make her fall hopelessly in love with me, and this time I shall guard my heart, ensuring she never again possesses the power to wound me so deeply. Not ever again." Darcy straightened in his seat, the tension in his jaw giving way to a look of fixed determination. "When next she sees me, she will find not the man she spurned, but the man she will find herself unable to resist." As the carriage rolled on toward London, Darcy's mind churned with schemes and strategies. He now knew exactly how he would go about showing Elizabeth Bennet the error of her ways. Upon arriving at his London townhouse, Darcy wasted no time in setting his plans in motion. He dispatched a note to Bingley, requesting his friend's presence at the earliest opportunity. When Bingley arrived, full of his usual good cheer and amiability, he was ushered into the study, after which assuming his usual attitude whenever a guest at Darcy House. "Bingley, I must confess to a grave error in judgment," Darcy began, once the obligatory discussion of the visit, the weather, and the roads had been exhausted. "It seems I was mistaken about the nature of Miss Jane Bennet's affections for you. New information has come to light that suggests she may indeed return your regard. A sweet-tempered, charming man, and several years Darcy's junior." Bingley's eyes widened. "Truly, Darcy, this is wonderful news. But what has prompted this change of heart on your part?" Darcy cleared his throat. "Suffice it to say, I have had reason to reconsider my previous assessment. The fault lies entirely with me and my misinterpretation of the situation. I would strongly encourage you to return to Hertfordshire and renew your attentions to Miss Bennet. That is to say, if your feelings remain unchanged." "Unchanged?" Bingley exclaimed. "My feelings have only grown stronger during our time apart. I shall waste no time in returning to Netherfield and seeking her out. Will you accompany me, Darcy? I would value your support and guidance." Darcy feigned hesitation for only a moment before nodding his assent. "Of course, Bingley. I have some business of my own to attend to in Hertfordshire. We shall travel together." As the two friends made their plans and preparations, Darcy's thoughts remained fixed on Elizabeth. He imagined her surprise and disbelief upon seeing him again, the gradual softening of her manner as he proved himself worthy of her affections. He would be charming, attentive, and irresistible, everything a proper suitor needed to be. And in the end, she will be mine, just as I intended from the start. Chapter 2. Hertfordshire, England, weeks later. The road to Hertfordshire stretched ahead, but it was not the distance that gave him pause. It was the memory of another silence long ago, entirely a different time and place, one having to do with another woman in his life, his mother, the late Lady Anne Darcy. Even as a boy, Fitzwilliam Darcy had understood that there were two versions of his mother. One belonged to society, poised, admired, radiant in her silks and pearls. The other existed within Pemberley's walls, restless, elusive, shaped by a restraint that softened on occasion, only to harden again without warning. Some days she would laugh with abandon and draw him into her joy, holding his hand as though she meant never to let go. Other days she would vanish into her rooms for hours, sometimes days, and the only sound from within would be the slow turn of pages or the faint chime of fine porcelain. Darcy had once believed he could temper her moods with affection. He remembered it all too painfully. He was 9, perhaps 10, and she had just returned from London, overwrought and exhausted. When she passed him in the corridor, distracted and silent, he had followed her into the sitting room and placed a hand over hers. "I missed you, mother," young Darcy had whispered. Her hand had stiffened beneath his, her smile had faltered. "Do not make a scene, Fitzwilliam," she had said in stark dismissal, pulling her hand away and retreating behind the cover of a nearby letter. He had learned much at that moment, how swiftly warmth could cool, how love, even when freely offered, might not be wanted. Her withdrawal had not been cruel, but it had wounded him all the same. From that day on he never reached first. He grew up indulged, protected, and deeply instructed, but never again a victim of unguarded emotions. What he felt, he kept hidden. What he longed for, he rarely named. In society they praised his reserve. At home, they respected it, and in solitude he fortified it. It was no accident that he had mastered self-control. It was survival. And now, close to 2 decades later, he found himself riding beside his friend Bingley on the road to Hertfordshire, his purpose cloaked in the guise of friendship. But it was not mere camaraderie that brought him back. He had proposed to a woman who had refused him with cutting clarity, a woman who had known the full extent of his feelings and returned none of them. He had overcome his struggle, bared his soul to another, and for it he had been wounded, dismissed. Here he was on the precipice of something dangerous, something that could either restore his pride or destroy what remained of his equanimity. But this time he would not subject his heart to such pain again. While it was the prevailing expectation that Mr. Bingley should one day return to Netherfield, Mr. Darcy's return to Hertfordshire, in company with his friend, could not go unnoticed. Quite the contrary, for no one expected him, not after the haughty manner in which he had comported himself when he was last in the vicinity. From the moment the two gentlemen were spotted on horseback near the edge of Meryton, word spread with such swiftness that by evening half the neighbourhood had already drawn their own conclusions as to how this development must affect the future of the single daughters in that part of the county. At Longbourn the news was met with mixed reactions. Mrs. Bennet declared it a blessing for her Jane, despite having long since discarded Charles Bingley as capricious and not worthy of her eldest daughter. Elizabeth, who had shared little of her time spent in company with one of the gentlemen in Kent, had even less to say. Miss Mary was even more indifferent than Elizabeth pretended to be, and the two younger girls, Miss Kitty and Miss Lydia, were chiefly concerned about whether Mr. Bingley might soon give another ball. The next day there the gentleman stood in Longbourn's parlour, the older of the two every inch the gentleman he had always been in appearance, with his handsome features and noble mien, and yet so altered in manner that Elizabeth scarcely knew what to make of him. "Miss Elizabeth," he said, bowing. His greeting was courteous, even pleasant by his standards, bearing none of the stiffness she recalled so vividly. He spoke to her with the same steady reserve he used for everyone else, nothing more, nothing less. "Mr. Darcy," Elizabeth said, careful to match his tone and demeanour, just as her voice betrayed nothing, nor had his. There was nothing in his expression to suggest he harboured ill will over the things she had said, or the things he had said that fateful evening. One would never have known what had happened between the two of them in Kent. The bitterness, the accusations. She knew and understood he meant to keep it that way. When, throughout the course of the visit, it was Mr. Darcy's turn to speak with Mr. Bennet, the younger man made some polite remark about the grounds, which Longbourn's master received with a nod and the barest hint of amusement. Darcy's conversation was impeccable, his composure unshaken. There were no missteps, no breaches in conduct. His performance, if one were to consider it such, was unparalleled, worthy of admiration and observation. And observing him is precisely what Elizabeth found herself doing, studying him more closely than she wished to admit. The man who once declared himself above his company now showed no such disdain. Both listening and engaging, he asked after Kitty and Lydia's pursuits, even invoking his own sister, Miss Georgiana Darcy's similar proclivities as a frame of reference, no doubt, sign of his sincerity. He complimented Mary on her playing, though he must have recalled her exhibition at the Netherfield ball well enough to know what he was about. At one point he had offered to turn the pages for her, eschewing her insistence that she did not wish to impose on him. This is not the proud man who simultaneously insulted my character and proposed in the same breath. He seems changed, Elizabeth allowed, and yet she did not trust the change. She could not. There was something in his manner too perfect, too deliberate. A man might feign charm, a man might learn what to say and when to say it, but a man could not unfeel what he had once so keenly felt. Yet she could not help but wonder at the reason behind it. Elizabeth had slipped from the crowded parlour on the pretence of needing air, and now traced the worn stones of the garden path, her mind replaying the visit's events in search of some hidden clue, anything she might have missed, as though the truth might reveal itself if only she paced long enough. She remembered the moment Mr. Darcy's intense gaze had found hers across the room, the seemingly effortless grace with which he conversed with her family. The instant their fingers had brushed lightly when she passed him the cup of tea, the tenderness of his touch lingering still on her skin. How maddening this preoccupation with a man she had once so thoroughly rejected. She almost voiced her disgust aloud. She had no reason to dwell on him, no cause to wonder at his motives or his intentions, and yet she could not seem to stop herself. Chapter 3. From the moment he entered Longbourn, Darcy knew he would be measured, by Elizabeth, by her family, and by his own memory of what had once passed between them. Still, no expression crossed his face as he offered his bow and his civil greetings. The performance had begun, and he meant to carry it off masterfully. Steady to his purpose, he offered nothing of himself save what he meant for her to see, the perfect picture of composure, confidence, and control. Elizabeth's greeting matched his in tone, civil but not exactly unreadable, having no doubt belied her intent. Good, he surmised, let her wonder at the change. As the visit continued to unfold, he moved through the room with the ease he'd cultivated in London. He conversed with Mr. Bennet about the trees lining the property and the state of the roads, observing the man's sharp eyes beneath the disguise of deep interest. He had endured Mrs. Bennet's exclamations with more patience than he might once have summoned, and offered just enough kindness to chip away the depths of her disapprobation he had earned from last year's indifference. His attention, however, rested where it always had. Elizabeth sat just beyond the reach of his ever-watchful gaze, yet never out of his awareness. She studied him. Of that he was certain. She was trying to make sense of his conduct, and he would give her reason to doubt every judgment she had once made. He had watched Bingley with Jane and saw how effortlessly his friend resumed their former intimacy, but even that display stirred something unpleasant within him. Jane smiled as before, yes, but not as freely, and for the first time Darcy wondered whether the injury he had helped cause had gone deeper than anyone had supposed. The thought unsettled him. Still, he would not falter. When Mary sat at the pianoforte, he had offered to be of assistance, not out of affection or admiration, but because Elizabeth was watching, and he needed her to see what he could be. He had spoken of his sister to Kitty and Lydia, not because they asked, but because it suited his purpose to appear generous and attentive. It cost him little, and it served his aim. His mission while formidable, surely was not impossible, to win her heart without risking further injury to his own heart. Every word, every gesture, every display was meant to achieve just that, and yet when their eyes met, only for a moment, he felt something stir. Danger. The same danger he had felt upon becoming better acquainted with her at Netherfield all those months ago. A perilous reminder of the pain he had suffered when he had laid his heart so bare in the face of her rejection. How odd to find myself in the same room with the man who proclaimed himself in love with me, most ardently. The same man whose offer of marriage I had spurned, owing to the officious manner of his proposal, that and his injury to my dearest Jane. Elizabeth tore herself away from her reflection in the mirror and wandered over to the window, her busy mind demanding satisfaction. But surely his being here with Bingley must count for something, a part of her argued, even if another part insisted that had he not interfered in the first place, Jane and Bingley might well be husband and wife by now. To further add to the questions in her mind, she asked herself, can a man who has been the means of setting a house on fire be lauded for putting the fire out? Once again, Elizabeth found herself unsure of just what to make of Mr. Darcy, a man seemingly transformed, determined to make himself agreeable among those he had once claimed as beneath him in every possible way. Having memorized his letter by heart, and now fully aware of how mistaken she'd been about his character, part of her could not help but wonder if his behaving in such a manner was meant for her. Surely not, she forced herself to consider, recalling the opening line of his letter, that it was by no means a repetition of those sentiments she had found so disgusting. No, she was sure his apparent change in behaviour was little more than her seeing him in a new light, one no longer tarnished by George Wickham's lies and her own prejudices against him. A funny thing that, now knowing that had she chosen she might very well be this man's betrothed, this man who was now no doubt lost to her forever, for if she knew nothing else about the opposite sex, it was that a man like Mr. Darcy would never deign to offer for the same woman twice. Her spirits half playful, half serious, Elizabeth thought, if a man like Mr. Collins could not be bothered to wait until the dust settled from a failed proposal, surely Mr. Darcy could do no less. Darcy and Bingley were never so animated as they were later that evening as they made their way back to Netherfield Park. As for the latter, the reason was evident, for he was now surer than ever of Jane Bennet's love for him. Her forgiving him so easily for his being away for so long was the surest symptom of love he could imagine. He told his riding companion as much and further added, I dare say a lesser woman would not have been half so generous as my Jane. His friend's sentiments gave Darcy pause, and he pondered if there were half a chance Elizabeth might be so easily inclined to forgive him for the careless manner in which he had offered her his hand. Bingley's unwavering enthusiasm would not be repressed. I cannot thank you enough for persuading me that Jane's heart was not lost to me, even if I was partly, in part, to blame for persuading you that you never had it in the first place. Even though, but as you explained your motives, that you were merely acting the part of a devoted friend, I cannot find fault in you, or my sisters either, because what would be the point of holding a grudge? None of our interests would be served, and besides, your accompanying me to Longbourn today, when you might easily have remained at Netherfield, is the best proof of your contrition, and for that I thank you, although I feared it would be much more of a test of your forbearance than I had expected. One might describe you as the epitome of a perfect gentleman, making love to the Bennets each in their turn, when everyone knows how much you disliked them. His words were like a dagger to Darcy's heart. Had he really comported himself so poorly when he was in Hertfordshire last autumn? Could that have been a factor in Elizabeth's ill opinion of him, and her being caught completely unaware of his love for her? I wish you would not say that, Bingley. What did I say that is not true? What I mean to say is, I do not like being reminded of how I was perceived then. As though unaware of how his words troubled Darcy, Bingley said, Well, it is not as though any bad opinion the Bennets may have suffered toward you before were not replaced by a month's worth of goodwill today. You were everything a gentleman ought to be, going so far as to sit with Miss Mary and turn the music sheets while she exhibited. Dare I ask the reason for what can only be described as this magnanimous alteration? Could it have anything to do with Miss Elizabeth, a consequence of your spending time in each other's company in Kent? I confess it has everything to do with her, Bingley. Despite my having concealed all that unfolded between Miss Elizabeth and me in Kent, I think it is only fair to inform you that, Besides seeing you reconciled with Miss Bennet, I have another purpose in being here in Hertfordshire." "One having to do with Miss Elizabeth?" Darcy nodded. "You see, Bingley, I love her with all my heart and soul." "Why did you not tell her when you were in Kent? Or is this a recent revelation?" "My feelings for her have been of a long duration. Suffice it to say, I don't know the words or the looks that established the foundation, but I am sure I was in the middle before I knew I had begun. In vain I had struggled. The same motives governing my desire to protect you, I could not help but apply to myself. But then I saw her in Kent, during a time and place when I least expected, and it felt serendipitous. A sure sign that, despite all my objections, she and I were meant to be. By reason, by reflection, by everything, I threw caution to the wind and offered her my hand in marriage." "Darcy, do you mean to say—" Bingley started. "And she rejected me, and in the worst possible way, saying I am the last man in the world she could be prevailed on to marry." Bingley's reaction was visible as though the piercing words had been directed at himself. His response, an audible groan, was no less discomforting. Darcy shook his head. "Indeed, you can only imagine how I felt hearing the woman to whom I had laid open my heart pronounce so bitter a verdict on the possibility of a future between us." His friend shook his head. "The Darcy I know would have been furious. You have always espoused that your good opinion, once lost, is lost forever, yet no one who bore witness to your comportment today could accuse you of harbouring harsh sentiments toward Miss Elizabeth. I do not recall the two of you being half so cordial toward each other before. Perhaps she has had time to reconsider her stance. It is the fashion of young ladies to reject the addresses of the man whom they secretly mean to accept when he first applies for their favour, and that sometimes the refusal is repeated a second, or even a third time. In view of that, is it your intention to offer her your hand again?" Oddly enough, Colonel Fitzwilliam had uttered words of a similar vein when he and Darcy were on their way to town from Kent. Darcy recalled thinking even then, such advice was more akin to the simpering of a fool. Now hearing Bingley espouse the same wisdom all but confirmed his initial impression. But on the other hand, what would be the harm in considering it, Darcy thought, with more hope than not. "I have every intention of doing so, but not with the same poorly devised, ill-conceived haste as when we were in Kent. I intend to court her properly, as I ought to have done, to win her heart, leaving no part unclaimed." What Darcy did not say, indeed dared not say, at least not aloud, was that he planned to make her see what a mistake she had made in stomping on his own heart so casually as she had done in Kent. Instead, he uttered, "When next I propose to Miss Elizabeth, she will not only be expecting my proposal, she will wish for it. I wish you ever luck in accomplishing said goal, my friend. I suppose a bit of luck will not hurt. That and the greatest alteration in my baser nature I can muster. And while disguise of any sort is indeed my abhorrence, then so be it if a bit of pretence on my part is warranted. If that is what it takes for me to make Miss Elizabeth Bennet realise her mistake in refusing the hand of someone of such consequence as me, Fitzwilliam Darcy, the Master of Pemberley and Derbyshire." Chapter 4. It was both a fortunate accident and a disconcerting turn of events that Elizabeth unexpectedly crossed paths with Mr. Darcy the following morning, just before the first light of dawn. A delicate mist wrapped around the hedgerows, casting a soft glow across the dim landscape. The only sound was the chirping of morning birds. A gentle breeze reminded her how wanting her attire was, as she drew her wrap tighter. Elizabeth had not anticipated meeting anyone, least of all Mr. Darcy, and the sight of him filled her with a mixture of emotions. For a fleeting moment his expression mirrored her own surprise. After a rather uncomfortable exchange of civilities, Mr. Darcy said, "You must know, surely you must know what I felt toward you in Kent has not simply disappeared as a consequence of the harsh words between us. My feelings for you are as they ever were." Here he paused, just long enough to swallow as if summoning his courage. Elizabeth was silent. At length he said, "I can have no reason to suspect your feelings for me have altered, but I hope you will give me the chance to make amends, to prove myself a man worthy of being loved by a woman like you, a woman worthy of being pleased." Elizabeth lowered her eyes, struggling to steady her breath. "Sir, I hope you will not allow yourself to suffer all the burdens of our unfortunate past. Your letter," she began. "If what you're saying is that my letter has softened your opinion of me, then for that I'm more than grateful. but words on a piece of paper can hardly earn me a place in your heart. I know it will take much more than that. I confess the reason for my being here is to court you as you ought to be courted, to win your heart," he said, uncertain if his intentions would be welcomed or spurned. He said nothing more. To reveal the depth of his plan so soon would be to risk too much. His expression, though earnest, betrayed nothing beyond what he chose to share. His voice carried no betrayal of his motives, but inside he was calculating. Only a total and irrevocable capitulation of her heart would do. The way she looked at him was not with suspicion. Dare I call it approbation? Darcy wondered, thinking it too soon. He would not allow himself to dwell upon it. "I should return now," she said, her tone guarded. The disappointment this response invoked was such that he dared not show, for he hoped for more time alone with her. "May I see you back to Longbourn?" he asked, bracing himself still for her possible rejection. Elizabeth hesitated, as if caught between decorum and indecision. No, thank you, sir," she exclaimed, her composure slipping. He smiled, a mixture of increasing confidence and a measure of renewed hope. "Then I will see you in a matter of hours, when Bingley calls on your sister." Here he paused, allowing a moment of uncertainty to linger between them before he continued, "And I call on you." Mrs. Bennet was delighted beyond compare in anticipation of the gentleman caller's imminent arrival. The parlour had been neatly arranged twice in as many hours. Jane, ever obliging, endured her mother's fussing over the length of her sleeves, the style of her hair, and the precise degree of lace visible at her collar. Kitty and Lydia were warned not to speak unless spoken to, with the latter only partially heeding the restriction. "Your dress is too dull," Mrs. Bennet muttered, casting a critical eye at Mary, who had taken up her position at the pianoforte. "You do not want to draw attention to yourself for the wrong reasons." "I am not convinced I desire attention of any kind," Mary replied, her fingers already moving over the keys. "Then let your music do the work. It did not escape my notice how the proud Mr. Darcy attended you so faithfully yesterday," her mother said, and promptly turned back to Jane with fresh instruction on how to arrange her lace to her best advantage. The visit to Longbourn that day was met with more ceremony than surprise. Mr. Bingley, to be sure, had earned a welcome reception, but it was Mr. Darcy whose presence unsettled the parlour, just enough to render all civility a conscious effort. He was not unwelcome. In truth, he was barely expected. That is to say, by all but Elizabeth, who still did not quite know how to think or how to feel after that morning's encounter. And yet, there he was, a mixture of composure and enigma. Longbourn's parlour was the picture of harmony. Jane sat nearest the window, a bit of needlework forgotten in her lap, while Kitty and Lydia competed for Mr. Bingley's attention with their usual exuberance. Mr. Bennet, having come in from his library with a look of mild alarm, retreated to a corner with a book and the apparent hope of being overlooked. Darcy, meanwhile, sat near the fireplace, speaking at times even without being spoken to, and no doubt observing much. Elizabeth had taken the seat across from him. Though she made a point of engaging with her sisters, her awareness of his presence remained constant. When at length the conversation turned to old acquaintances, Mr. Bennet, an odd mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humour, reserve and caprice, glanced over his spectacles and remarked, "It is a fine thing, is it not, that a man may spend a season away, return with better manners, and earn more praise than if he had behaved well all along?" A few laughed, and even Elizabeth smiled, but it was Darcy who stiffened, barely, but enough. Mrs. Bennet, missing the slight pause, added, "Time improves a man, if he has sense enough to learn something by it. I have always said as much." The remark was flippant, unstudied, and yet it struck all the same. Darcy's expression remained blank, but something in his eyes shifted. Elizabeth caught it. She could not have named the feeling. It was not shame, nor pride exactly, but a tightening, as if he were reminded of some long-resolved lesson he had no wish to revisit. He turned to the window as though the garden offered some immediate interest. Elizabeth, watching him, again wondered at the nature of his change. He appeared a man improved, but improvement of what kind? She, who had once accused him of arrogance, now doubted she understood him at all. Indeed, one must suppose a little time and distance usually are all it ever takes, Mrs. Bennet observed, not without a glance in Mr. Darcy's direction. How quickly opinions change when convenience requires it. Elizabeth coloured a little. She could not help frequently glancing at Mr. Darcy, though every glance convinced her of what she dreaded, for though he was not always looking at her mother, she was convinced that his attention was invariably fixed by her. Would her mother never cease speaking so injudiciously in this gentleman's presence? Elizabeth wondered. Had Mr. Bingley's escape from that part of the country last November in the wake of her boasting of an imminent wedding at Netherfield not taught her temperance? Apparently not, she considered. Darcy's countenance betrayed nothing, but inside the remark struck deeper than he dared allow to show. He knew what he had once conveyed, however unintentionally, and he knew how far he must go to convince not just Elizabeth, but the whole of her family, that the man they remembered was not the man who sat among them now. All his pretences thus far had been insufficient to persuade Mrs. Bennet he was a changed man. He had thought his presence at Longbourn, obliging, attentive, would speak for itself, yet he heard it in her tone. To her, as to others in the room, he was beginning to suspect he was still the man who had once dismissed Hertfordshire, and all who lived in it. Do I ever have my work cut out in order to prove otherwise? Although Mr. Darcy felt the full weight of scrutiny, he did not mean to show it as each Bennet responded to his presence in a manner most characteristic. Lydia, emboldened by the memory of his reportedly having £10,000 a year, declared that she would not mind marrying into a place like Pemberley, drawing an audible gasp from Jane and an incredulous look from Elizabeth. Later, when the conversation grew fragmented, and the others were momentarily distracted by the antics of Lydia and a toppled teacup, Elizabeth found herself near the window. Her hand rested lightly on the sash. She did not hear his approach until he spoke. "The atmosphere is steadily improving," he said, as though they had been conversing in that easy manner all afternoon. Elizabeth turned toward him, uncertain whether he referred to the weather or to something more. "I am sure it is much the same as it ever was, sir," she said at last, "though perhaps your perspective has shifted." He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary. His voice lower, he said, "Indeed, I find my opinions altered on many things." She studied his face. It was unreadable, perhaps deliberately so. But something in his voice stirred a response in her. "I am glad to hear it," she said, "though I dare say you're not alone in your reconsiderations." It seemed Elizabeth was considering a truce, if only for a moment. She could not deny the effect of his presence. Nor could she dismiss the idea that his altered manner had something to do with her. His speech earlier that morning had taught her as much. Clearly, this was his way of proving his point. She reminded herself she must be cautious. A gentleman might change, but not so thoroughly and in so short a duration of time. What a test of one's endurance Darcy could not help but consider once free of Elizabeth's relations. Not that he should not have expected it. His unvarnished opinion of her family espoused so harshly that fateful evening at the parsonage could not help but intrude. The situation of your mother's family, though objectionable, was nothing in comparison to that total want of propriety so frequently, so almost uniformly betrayed by herself, by your three younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. Indeed, the Bennets were just as they ever were. It was he who was endeavouring to endear himself to them. Darcy was more certain than ever of his purpose. He would offer Elizabeth every reason to think well of him. In this he was determined to succeed. "I must, at any cost. I cannot fail again." The carriage rocked with a steady rhythm as it made its way back to Netherfield. But Darcy hardly noticed the motion. His mind lingered on the conversation by the window, on the way Elizabeth's voice had softened, not with affection perhaps, but with something that resembled openness. He had said little. It had taken effort not to say more. Words, once wielded without care, had nearly cost him everything. Now, every silence was considered, every remark calculated. Let her weigh it at her leisure. Let her watch him closely. He welcomed her scrutiny now, and if she came to think well of him, if she came to see that he was not the man she had once rejected, then perhaps, in time, she would be willing to hear more. He was already making progress. She had spoken of reconsiderations. He could not be certain of her meaning, but it was enough for now. Chapter 5. The next few days at Longbourn unfolded in much the same fashion as those prior, with visits from Mr. Bingley and inevitably Mr. Darcy. Such was his happy manners that Elizabeth was beginning to suspect he really had changed. He was no Bingley to be sure, but then that would have been too much. However, as was Mr. Bingley's wont to do with Jane, Mr. Darcy simply positioned himself with such intention that left little doubt he meant to be seen, and whether it was by accident or design, he was often near her. Her eldest sister's repeated observations of Darcy's altered behaviour finally persuaded Elizabeth to confide in Jane that which she had thus far never spoken to anyone about save the gentleman himself. "Jane," Elizabeth began, a hint of reserve in her voice, "I must tell you about what transpired between Mr. Darcy and me in Kent. I had not planned to tell a soul, owing to the delicacy of it all, but what on earth happened? Mr. Darcy offered me his hand in marriage. He proposed," Elizabeth said. In view of her sister's astonished expression, Elizabeth continued, "It has been on my mind incessantly, especially now that we are all together again in Hertfordshire." A picture of contentedness owing to her own lover's return, Jane looked at her sister with curiosity. "Proposed? But how could that have been? It is evident you refused him, Lizzie. But with it being so advantageous a match, I fear I must ask why." Elizabeth sighed, recalling the tumultuous encounter. When he proposed, it was so unexpected, and his words, they were both ardent and, at the same time, wounding. He spoke of his feelings toward me, yet also of the obstacles he perceived in our union. Jane listened intently, her eyes widening with each detail. And how does this explain his behaviour now? "The very next morning he gave me a letter," Elizabeth continued, "in which he addressed my concerns and misunderstandings. I have read it over and over, and though my opinions are not entirely altered, each reading softens my view of him a little more. But not enough to exonerate him, she thought, but did not say. And yet here he was, returning day after day, as if determined to undo every harsh word she had once flung at him. "So, you believe his conduct now is an attempt to make amends?" Jane asked. "Yes, exactly," Elizabeth replied. "Indeed, he told me as much as regards his intention to make amends. It is just that his manner of going about it cannot help but give me pause. He is so thoughtful and pleasant, almost as if he is trying, bit by bit, to prove false the harsh words I once levelled against him. Such a rapid transformation in his character has left me quite confounded." Jane pondered her sister's words for a moment before speaking. "Perhaps it is not so much a transformation, Lizzie, as it is a revelation of his true character. Could it be that the Mr. Darcy we thought we knew was merely a facade, a mask he wore to conceal his true nature?" Elizabeth considered this notion. She shrugged. "It is possible, I suppose, but why would he feel the need to hide his true self?" "Perhaps he feared rejection or vulnerability," Jane suggested. "Or maybe he simply did not know how to express himself in a manner that would be well received." Elizabeth nodded, absorbing her sister's wisdom, even as she recognised Jane only ever saw the best in everyone. Still, it was not an unreasonable surmise. "You may be right, Jane. It is just so difficult to reconcile the man I see now with the one I thought I knew." "People can surprise us, Lizzie," Jane said, smiling, "and sometimes those surprises can be quite pleasant. I posit he may have taken your words to heart and truly wishes to become a better man, not only for your sake, but for his own as well. Again, it is possible. But can a man's character really change so drastically in such a brief span of time?" "Love has a way of inspiring even the most stubborn of hearts," Jane replied, her eyes undoubtedly twinkling with the knowledge of her own blossoming romance. "And if Mr. Darcy's feelings for you are as strong as his actions suggest, then it is not so far-fetched to believe he would go to great lengths to prove himself worthy of your affections." Elizabeth sighed, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She could not deny the thrill that coursed through her whenever Mr. Darcy's gaze lingered upon her, nor the way her heart raced at the sound of his voice. And yet, the memory of his past transgressions still cast a shadow over her thoughts, making it difficult to fully embrace the idea of his redemption, despite mounting evidence. "I confess I am at a loss as to how to proceed," Elizabeth admitted. "My feelings toward Mr. Darcy are as complex as the man himself, and I fear I may never fully understand either." Jane reached out and took her sister's hand, offering a reassuring squeeze. "Give it time, Lizzie. Allow yourself the opportunity to see Mr. Darcy for who he truly is, without the weight of past prejudices clouding your judgment. If his intentions are sincere, then perhaps you may find a love as wonderful as the one I have been blessed with." Thank you for listening to Love is Here and Now Gone, chapters 1 through 5. If you have enjoyed this story thus far, and I hope you have, you will not want to miss what happens next. Subscribe to this channel today and be among the first to be notified when Love is Here and Now Gone, the complete audiobook, is available for your listening pleasure. Your likes, subscribes, comments, and shares help this channel grow.